Hey, welcome back. We got the results of the Engage Cup voting stuff, and now we know the 12 units are going to appear on the banner, as well as whatever freebie we're going to get. Because of that, I figured it would be worth highlighting all of the units in some capacity, whether that's through like optimization builds, or just stuff you want to fodder them for. And that's really what this video is going to be about. So if you're on the fence about who you want to pick, or if you already know who you want to pick but you don't necessarily know what to do with them, then this is going to be the video for you. And really that's all it boils down to, so we may as well just get right into it. We have 12 units in the form of Brave Marth, Ascended Celica, Legendary Sigurd, Scion Leaf, Groom Roy, Flame Lynn, Summer Erica, Young Ike, Legendary Makaya, Valentine's Lucina, Halloween Female Corin, and Legendary Byleth. I'm going to be going in that specific order, so if you do want to skip around and look for specific units, just keep those in mind. But yeah, we might as well get started with Marth, who for a Vantage unit isn't too bad, all things considered. However, I do think now that with Miracle just being everywhere, relying on one-shots, even if you're able to Vantage at whatever HP you want, isn't really going to mean much if you can't kill. That isn't to say he's going to miss kills, because he does hit stupidly hard, especially with Shining Emblem, and if you were to give him something like Special Spiral, then he could continue to loop it. The big issue is just going to be with anything that has Miracle, because no matter if he's doing like 10 billion damage, it's all going to go reduced to 1 HP anyway. And I'm hoping when he gets a refine, they'll make it so he gets some sort of enemy phase desperation like his winter variant has. But either way, he's still a pretty decent unit, and I don't really want to take away from that front. And honestly, you could just use him right out of the gate if you wanted to. Most of these units, you could pretty much do that because they more so come with everything they need to get going than a lot of other older units. So really, all you have to do is give him something like Quicken Pulse, and then if he initiates combat, he gets Shining Emblem off, and then he could just Vantage Sweep after that point. And one of the cooler things about it is that he doesn't have to be within any proximity of his ally, so he can go into combat with even Tempest. But if you want to do something that's a bit more optimal, you could just continue to stack his attack, give him Special Spiral, whether that's 3 or 4. Special Spiral 4 could easily edge out a kill where you might have missed it from stuff like damage reduction, or just not dealing enough damage in general, because Special Spiral 4 does add 5 points of damage. But with Joint Drive Attack and Quicken Pulse, or you could switch out Quicken Pulse for anything that boosts attack and speed, and then run an ally that can grant Quicken Pulse to Marth at the start of the turn, you'll be good to go. Next you have Ascended Celica, who is a really strong Aether Raids defense unit. Again, she also comes ready out of the gate with everything she needs. The only thing you really want to replace is her C-slot, unless you want to provide some sort of external support to other allies that may want null follow-up in some capacity. But otherwise, you definitely want to get rid of it because it's not helping her out in any scenario, mainly because it doesn't apply to her at all. You can basically give her double life and death, swap out her C-slot for pretty much anything you want that could potentially deal damage or inflict chip damage after combat or anything of the sort, as long as it benefits her in some capacity. And then you could also give her Blazing Wind, and while she will not necessarily have the special ready to go on turn 1, after the first combat, assuming the foe counterattacks, and she has to attack twice to kill, she'll have an AoE ready to go, which is really, really good. Of course, if you want to do something a bit more gimmicky, but could also be really strong in the sense of just keeping her alive, you could give her Attack Speed Finish and Mystic Boost Seal, so that way after combat she could just return back into the Miracle range, and at that point she'll just be able to constantly attack and attack without any worry, unless the foe maybe has some sort of enemy phase Brave or Fatal Smoke, but you're more than likely going to be running into the former more so than the latter since it's relatively niche. Then you have Legendary Sigurd, who also works pretty well out just with base kit. You don't really have to change anything either. I think people who have been around long enough know how much of a terror he used to be, and for what it's worth, he could still be pretty good, but I would more so use him on an Aether Raids offense setting, or just anywhere but Aether Raids defense, because I don't think he really functions there as well nowadays. Either way, you can still just give him Quicken Pulse, he'll have an instant special, and he can just grant movement to all his allies once he triggers it. But if you want to do something a bit more optimal, you can give him Near Trace so he can run away after combat. You can still grant movement to additional allies, and then they can also repo you out because they'll have the additional movement to get in there. But if you are also worried about stuff like Even Pulse Tie or Odd Pulse Tie or anything that could get rid of his instant special, Wyvern Katana might not be the worst option, mainly because you'll still be able to get it off on every second hit, assuming you have Quicken Pulse active. And while he will lose it on a fair amount of attack by replacing Hollow Tearfang, he will have dual phase capabilities, which can actually make him a lot more obnoxious to deal with. But if he's not dealing too much damage anyway, it might not mean much in the long run. It's mainly just food for thought at the end of the day. Then you have Scion Leaf, who I'm just not going to keep repeating these points. Yeah, they all work the base kit. All you really have to do is give him Mystic Boost. And he has the Hell Miracle effect where as long as he has above 1 HP at the start of combat, he'll have Miracle. So if you just give him Mystic Boost, then he can just keep refreshing it. And really, there's not much else you can really do with it outside of that. You could give him Defense Res Smoke 3 if you want to try some sort of Pathfinder gimmick set with his PRF Gale Force, where he attacks, sets it up, and then he could run away a bit, and then allies can swoop through him and have extended range. But again, that's more food for thought. You also have Groomroy, who is a very, very solid damage dealer thanks to Blazing Polearms and Faith in Humanity granting the tempo effect, as well as additional bonuses, which means he's not going to struggle to get damage out whatsoever. So with Flow Force, Sturdy Surge, he's getting an absurd amount of DPS, which is really nice. And if you add Blade Session on top of it, he's not really going to struggle to just kill. Or at the very least, if he doesn't kill, he could just heal back whatever he dealt, because Sturdy Surge heals like a lot. And then he could run away after with Blazing Polearms, which is pretty convenient. But if you want to use him for Gale Force, you could potentially just replace Flow Force, give him Flow Guard, and then run Attack Speed Clash, because Attack Speed Clash already does the second half of what Flow Force does in just neutralizing any penalties to those stats. But with Flow Guard in tow, you can prevent any sort of instant special retaliation, or anything of the sort that would charge the foe's specials, because with Faith in Humanity and Flow Guard, the only way they're going to be able to charge their own specials is with tempo themselves. Meanwhile, with Flame Lynn, just give her the null follow-up seal. She really doesn't need much else. She's pretty much perfect out of the gate. But if you did want to try something a bit more gimmicky, you could replace Godlike Reflexes with Vital Astra and then give her Times Pulse and Bulwark, so that way she can act as a more threatening frontliner without the threat of anybody sniping your backline, assuming you try to pile units behind her. And it's really just going to boil down to what you really want out of her. You could either give her Vital Astra, which does work against AoEs, or you could give her Godlike Reflexes, which is a lot more consistent in damage reduction, and will give her protection from stuff like Deadeye and Lethality and all that. So it's really just going to boil down to what you want to accomplish with her. Meanwhile, with Erica, she has a null follow-up tome with Guard and Guard Smoke. It's pretty strong. If you give her Blade Session, her damage output's going to be a lot better. And then with Moonlit Bangle F, she'll just hit stupidly hard once her special triggers. The only caveat is just that if she has to take damage, there's a good chance she's probably going to die. But with Steady Impact, she can potentially live a single physical hit, but it's really going to vary. Still, if you're not very confident on that front, you could replace her B with Water Sweep, and then give her Attack Defense form. And while you will be losing on a fair amount of speed out of this, I'm fairly confident that she can still make speed checks without the Sacred Seal. And then Young Ike, Darting Breath. There you go, endgame. Every time the foe initiates combat and he has Darting Breath, he can always retaliate with an instant Radiant Aether, unless the foe has tempo, or if Ike's inflected with Guard. The latter you're probably more so going to have to fear, but it's, again, going to ultimately depend on where you use him. Still, you could just use him as a melee specialist with Farsafe support instead, so giving him something like Finish and Tempo. You can still keep the Darting Breath seal, so that way he could just heal way more, and he can always get Radiant Aether out on the first hit, which I think is going to be really important, especially for sustainability purposes. And then with Makaya, you could just give her the Fury Seal. She does have Desperation 2 in her weapon, and she's still a relatively decent unit for what it's worth. Armor, Cav effectiveness with Desperation and Guaranteed Follow-ups, not bad whatsoever. But I'm not very confident that she could set it up all too easily, because Prescience is only 30% damage reduction, which is still a fair amount, but when you consider that she only has 38 base HP, it's really pushing it. So with Fury 3, she could fall into the range much faster, and it does boost her bulk by a bit, which can actually make or break a lot of situations. But if you aren't confident in her just being able to set it up, you're better off just running Windsweep with no follow-up seal. So that way she can still get the guaranteed follow-up, she doesn't have to worry about any physical hits that target her defense, and if it so happens that a dragon is able to counterattack, then you can just run Sturdy Impact and potentially soak a hit that way. But that's also going to boil down to whether or not the foe can still pierce through all of that, because she's also not getting damage reduction by ditching her B. You also have Valentine's Lucina, who is a really strong near save unit, thanks to Future Vision and her PRF granting the Dull effect, meaning that no foe can get visible buffs during combat, and then with Savvy Fighter and her really good speed, and pretty respectable bulk, mainly because she also has 40% damage reduction from her weapon, she's not going to struggle to eat hits on the physical side, at least for near save purposes. However, if you do want to try her for far save purposes, I would highly recommend just rehauling her entire kit, mainly because Savvy Fighter isn't really going to be doing much for far save purposes since we have so many effects that just pierce through damage reduction. So if you were to run something like Arcane Downfall with Hardy Fighter, she'll be able to consistently loop Aegis, and she's able to soak a lot of far save threats pretty well. But just keep in mind, if you run into a dual Chrom, there's a good chance that she's going to die anyway, because he hits really, really hard. And then you have Halloween Female Corrin, who also doesn't really need much. This is really just going to boil down to just swapping out her C slot, but that's pretty minimal at the end of the day. Her base kit's basically perfect, and you can just give her the distant counter D seal, which means no matter what, she's going to be stupidly threatening, whether that's at 1 range or 2 range. But if you did want to prioritize one specific role, you could try for something that's just 1 range specialist stuff. So if you were to give her the null follow-up seal, then she doesn't have to worry about auto doubles or even getting her own follow-up prevented because she doesn't have no follow-up in her weapon. So that really helps out a lot. And if for some reason she can't get Negating Thing charged up again for the next combat, she could always fall back on Speed Smoke 4 because her speed is really high. It's basically more of a failsafe for your failsafe. And finally, we have Legendary Byleth, who, say it with me, works pretty well at base kit. But obviously there is some stuff you can definitely change out. You can definitely get rid of his A and B for something that boosts attack and speed and then wind sweep respectively. He has a null follow-up slaying tome, which means he can always get Sublime Heaven on the first attack, assuming that there isn't any sort of like in-combat pulse, but that's really, really rare anyway. But with wind sweep and attack speed ideal, he doesn't really have to worry about a lot of physical threats. And if I remember correctly, Sublime Heaven also scales even higher if the foe is a dragon. So if it so happens that you have to go up against a dragon, well, you're going to be fine because he's just going to be hitting stupidly hard. And really, that's about it when it comes to all the units in their viability. But if you just wanted to fodder any of them off, well, then there's some notable highlightable fodder worth discussing, such as Godlike Reflexes and Speed Smoke 4 from Flame Lynn, which is a really good combination, especially since you can grab both really easily. You just give this to any sort of speedy sword or any speedy unit in general that's infantry, and as long as they're able to loop it pretty well, they're going to be acting really, really well as an infantry tank. You also have Even Tempest from Brave Marth, which I think is pretty underrated, especially for Gale Force purposes. You give this to any sort of infantry or flying unit, and if they have the ability to Gale Force pretty easily, you give them Double Fury, and then whatever respective B slot they need. And as long as they're able to get Gale Force off on the first hit, and then fall into the 50% range for Wings of Mercy after the second combat, or if you just set it up by other means with something like Winter Bernadetta, then it's going to go really, really well. And especially now that Emblem is a thing, Gale Force is definitely going to be much more valuable now than it's ever been. But if that's not your thing, you could always just grab Spurn. It's damage reduction. A lot of units have it, but Spurn's still one of the better ones that we have, so you could just give this to any sort of high-speed infantry unit, and there you go. Beyond that, you could grab Infantry Null Follow for any of your infantry supports, and I think Na is probably one of the better options. She is a really good support unit now, thanks to her Oracle's Breath granting the Visible Breath effect, invisible buffs and all that. So if you were to run her as a support unit, Infantry Null Follow is easily going to be one of her best C slots. And with the added benefit of also being able to grab Life and Death alongside it, you could also try and make somebody a Bright Shrine Soak, which is pretty convenient. Or anybody that soaks like attack and speed. Any of that would be really good. Although you could also grab Dragon's Wrath 4 from Halloween Corrin and then give it to any sort of unit that can retaliate with an instant special, which can be really devastating. I think Fa is one of the more highlightable candidates when it comes to it because Eternal Breath does grant the Mistletoe effect. And while Fa doesn't necessarily have like the best stat distribution, she does have a lot of HP and a fair amount of attack. So if you were to give her Dragon's Wrath 4, which also grants damage reduction, she can retaliate with a really hard-hitting 2 cooldown special. And I think she's definitely one of the better options, especially if you are looking to give this to somebody that's easily marchable. Beyond that, it's Savvy Fighter. Savvy Fighter is still pretty decent for what it's worth in my opinion, mainly because it does grant no follow-up and damage reduction, which is pretty good. But you're never going to be using it for far safe purposes because there's too much stuff that just pierces through damage reduction. So if you had to give it to anybody, you give it to any sort of speedy near safe. But you could also argue that Hardy Fighter is still going to be a lot better. Still, considering how rare it is, well, you could just grab a free Savvy Fighter and then Kestrel Stance with it. So I don't think that's too bad. And that's really about it when it comes to the overall Engage Cup. I think there's a lot of potential here, especially since we are getting a summoning banner and we get to pick any of these for free. I'm probably going to go for Celica for Infantry Null Follow, mainly because I do want the skill for some devious purposes. But either way, that's just me. You'll have to let me know what you think down below. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, I'll see you later.